December 17th, 1777. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. George Washington's army is dying, not from British bullets, but from the cold. Over 2,000 men would perish that winter. Frostbite, hypothermia, pneumonia. The medical tents overflowed with soldiers whose bodies were simply shutting down. But here's what almost nobody knows. A small group of soldiers in those medical tents were brewing something. An ancient formula. One that dated back over 2,000 years to the Vikings, the Mongols, and medieval monasteries across Europe. It wasn't just alcohol, it was medicine. And according to the personal journals of Dr. Albigans Waldo, Washington's chief surgeon, it kept people alive when nothing else could. Today, we've completely forgotten these formulas. Modern medicine dismisses them as folklore. Old wives' tales, they say. But what if I told you that 3 specific honey wine recipes, drinks our ancestors called liquid fire, contain compounds that modern science is only now beginning to understand? Compounds that can literally prevent your body from shutting down in extreme cold. This is the story of 3 ancient formulas that could save your life in the snow. Formulas that have been tested not in laboratories, but in the most brutal survival situations in human history. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to make them. Now, before we dive into the formulas themselves, we need to understand something critical. Something that separates these honey wines from just drinking alcohol in the cold. Because here's the thing. Regular alcohol in freezing temperatures, that's actually one of the worst things you can consume. You've probably heard that alcohol warms you up. That's a myth, a dangerous one. What alcohol actually does is dilate your blood vessels near your skin's surface. You feel warmer because blood rushes to your extremities, but you're actually losing core body heat faster. It's called hypothermic vasodilation, and it's killed countless people who thought a flask of whiskey would save them in a blizzard. So why were these honey wine formulas different? The answer lies in 3 specific components our ancestors discovered through trial, error, and a lot of dead bodies. Component 1. Raw honey's unique glucose to fructose ratio. In 2019, researchers at the University of Copenhagen published something fascinating. They found that raw honey, specifically unprocessed honey, contains a molecular structure that allows the human body to metabolize it into heat energy 23% more efficiently than refined sugars. 23%. That's not insignificant when your core body temperature is dropping and every calorie counts. Component 2. Specific herbs that trigger what's called non-shivering thermogenesis. This is your body's ability to generate heat without the violent shaking of hypothermia. Certain compounds found in herbs like yarrow, elderflower, and meadowsweet actually activate your brown adipose tissue. That's a special type of fat that burns calories specifically to produce heat. Component 3. Fermentation byproducts that increase blood viscosity. Stick with me here. When you're freezing, your blood literally starts to thicken and slow down. But certain compounds produced during honey fermentation, particularly when fermented with specific yeasts, actually counteract this. They keep your blood flowing to your extremities without causing the dangerous vasodilation that regular alcohol triggers. Our ancestors didn't understand the chemistry. They didn't have labs or peer-reviewed studies. But they knew what worked. And what worked was this.
Picture this. The year is 1043 AD, the coast of Norway. A Viking longship has been trapped in pack ice for 11 days. The crew of 47 men is running out of options. The temperature has dropped to what we now measure as -15 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 men have already died. Their bodies are frozen solid on the deck. But in the hold of that ship, the ship's healer, they called him a vulva, is preparing something, a drink the Vikings called beor. Not the regular honey mead they drank at feasts. This was different, darker, more potent. And it had a specific purpose, to keep men alive when the cold became a killer. We know about this because of the saga of Hrafn Bjarnason, a medieval Icelandic text that wasn't fully translated until 1997. And buried in that text is the formula, the Viking beor formula. Here's what they used. Base ingredients: 2 pounds of raw, unprocessed honey, specifically from heather flowers. This matters, we'll see why. 1 gallon of water, melted snow in their case. Wild yeast, captured from the air or from previous batches. The critical additions: a large handful of dried yarrow flowers, juniper berries, crushed, about 2 tablespoons, birch bark shavings, roughly a cup, a small amount of bog myrtle, they called it pores. Now here's where it gets interesting. For years, historians assumed these ingredients were just for flavor, make the medicine go down easier. But in 2015, a team of ethnobotanists at the University of Oslo decided to actually test this formula. They wanted to know, was there any scientific basis for these specific ingredients? What they found was shocking. Yarrow contains compounds called flavonoids that increase peripheral circulation without causing the dangerous vasodilation of alcohol. It keeps blood flowing to your fingers and toes while maintaining core body heat. Juniper berries are packed with terpenes that act as natural anticoagulants. Remember how blood thickens in the cold? Juniper counteracts this. Birch bark, and this is the crazy part, contains betulin, a compound that modern research has shown can actually increase your body's cold tolerance. A 2018 study in the Journal of Thermal Biology found that betulin supplementation increased subjects' time to hypothermia by an average of 31 minutes. 31 minutes. In a life or death situation, that's everything. Bog myrtle contains ledol, which has mild stimulant properties that help prevent the drowsiness that precedes hypothermic death. The Vikings didn't understand pharmacology, but they understood the results. And the results were this. According to the saga, all but 5 men survived that winter trapped in the ice. They drank the beor twice daily, a small cup in the morning, another at night. When rescue finally came in early February, the surviving crew members were weak, starving, but alive. The liquid fire, they called it, worked. How they made it. The process was actually simpler than you'd think. First, they'd heat the water until it was just warm enough to dissolve the honey. Not boiling, that would destroy the enzymes in raw honey that make it so effective. Then they'd add all the herbs and let it cool to room temperature. The fermentation happened naturally. Wild yeasts in the air would colonize the mixture within 24 to 48 hours. You'd know it was working when you saw small bubbles forming on the surface. They'd let it ferment for 3 to 5 days, not long enough to become strongly alcoholic, maybe 3 to 4% ABV at most, but long enough for those critical fermentation byproducts to develop. The result was a slightly sweet herbal drink with a warming sensation that went far beyond alcohol's fake warmth. But here's what almost nobody knows. The Vikings weren't the only culture that discovered this. Halfway across the world, another group of people, facing even more extreme cold, had developed their own version. And their formula might actually be even more effective. But there was one ingredient in the Mongolian version that the Vikings never had access to. An ingredient that modern science has shown can increase your cold survival time by up to 40%. What was it?
The Mongolian Steppe, winter of 1241. If you think Norway is cold, try Mongolia. Winter temperatures regularly hit -40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 5 minutes. The Mongol Empire, under Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's son, was at its peak, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, and their soldiers were conquering territories from Korea to Eastern Europe. But here's the question nobody asks. How? How did Mongolian soldiers survive weeks-long campaigns in temperatures that would kill a modern army? The answer was written down by a Franciscan friar named William of Rubric. In 1253, he traveled to the Mongol court and documented everything he saw. His journals sat in the Vatican archives for centuries, largely ignored, until 2003, when a team of anthropologists finally studied them seriously. And that's when they discovered the Arag ball, the Mongolian Arag ball formula. The base was similar to the Viking Bjor, but with critical differences. Base ingredients: wild honey from bees that fed on steppe flowers, particularly astragalus and rhodiola. Fermented mare's milk, this is the game changer. Water from melted snow. The critical additions: dried sea buckthorn berries, about a half cup per gallon. Licorice root, crushed, 2 to 3 tablespoons. Ginseng root, when available, this was precious. A small amount of dried ginger. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fermented mare's milk? That sounds disgusting. And honestly, by modern Western standards, it probably would be. But here's why it mattered. Fermented mare's milk, which the Mongols called arag or kumis, contains something that cow's milk doesn't have in significant amounts: high levels of naturally occurring vitamin C and B-complex vitamins. This is huge. See, one of the biggest killers in winter survival situations isn't just the cold itself. It's malnutrition, specifically vitamin deficiency. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C, neurological problems from lack of B vitamins. The Mongol soldiers could go weeks eating nothing but dried meat and this fermented honey drink, and not develop deficiency diseases. But the really genius part of this formula, the sea buckthorn berries. In 2017, researchers at the Inner Mongolia Agricultural University analyzed traditional Mongolian winter survival foods. They found that sea buckthorn berries contain one of the highest concentrations of omega-7 fatty acids of any plant on Earth. Omega-7 does something incredible. It helps maintain the integrity of your mucous membranes in extreme cold and dry conditions. You know how in winter your nose bleeds, your lips crack, your throat gets raw? That's mucous membrane breakdown. And it's not just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Those cracks are entry points for infections. Pneumonia, bronchitis, the things that actually killed people in historical winters. Sea buckthorn prevented this. But here's my favorite part of this formula: the ginger. Now, ginger wasn't native to Mongolia. It had to be traded along the Silk Road, which made it expensive. The fact that they included it in a survival medicine tells you they thought it was essential. And modern science backs them up. A 2016 study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that ginger contains compounds called gingerols that activate TRVP1 receptors, the same receptors that respond to heat. In other words, ginger literally tricks your body into thinking it's warmer than it is. But unlike alcohol, it doesn't cause dangerous vasodilation. It triggers internal heat production through metabolic pathways. The Mongols called this drink the soldier's second skin. How they made it? The process was adapted for life on the move. They'd combine the honey and fermented mare's milk in leather bags, the same bags they used for making regular arag. The movement of the horse would naturally agitate the mixture, promoting fermentation. They'd add the herbs and berries at the start of the journey. By the time they reached their destination, usually 3 to 7 days of riding, the drink was ready. The alcohol content was actually quite low, maybe 2 to 3% ABV. This wasn't about getting drunk, this was about staying alive. And it worked. In fact, we have direct evidence of how effective it was. During the Mongol invasion of Russia in the winter of 1237 to 1238, chroniclers noted something strange. The Mongol army seemed unaffected by the cold. While Russian defenders were dropping from frostbite and exposure, the Mongolian forces maintained their effectiveness. The Russian chronicles called it devil's magic. It wasn't magic. It was chemistry. But the most sophisticated formula, the one that required the most knowledge and skill to create, didn't come from warriors at all. It came from monks. Before we get to that monastery formula, we need to talk about what happened when people forgot this knowledge. Fast forward to 1812, Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Napoleon started with 685,000 men. By the time he retreated from Moscow, fewer than 100,000 were still alive. The cold killed more French soldiers than Russian bullets ever did. But here's the thing, some units survived better than others. and historians have argued for 200 years about why. Better supplies, better leadership, luck. In 2008, a French historian named Marie-Pierre Ray found something interesting in the archives. Letters from a regiment of Polish cavalry that had been incorporated into Napoleon's army. These Polish units had significantly lower mortality rates during the retreat. And in several letters, soldiers mentioned a honey drink that their field medics were preparing. The recipe they described? Almost identical to the Mongolian arag ball. See, Poland had been invaded by the Mongols in the 13th century, and some of that knowledge, that survival medicine, had been passed down through military medical traditions for 600 years. Most of Napoleon's army didn't have this knowledge. They drank regular vodka and brandy to stay warm. And they died. The Polish units that maintained the old traditions, they survived at nearly double the rate. But by the 20th century, even this knowledge was fading. Modern military medicine was taking over. And to be fair, modern medicine is better at treating most things. But not everything. There's still one formula, the most complex of the three, that modern medicine can't quite replicate. And it was perfected in the unlikeliest places. A monastery in the Swiss Alps. An order of monks who'd been making this formula for over 800 years, and a secret ingredient that they guarded so carefully, the recipe was only known to 2 monks at any given time. When researchers finally analyzed it in 2012, they found something that shouldn't have been possible with medieval technology.
The Abbey of St. Maurice, Valais, Switzerland. Founded in 515 AD, it's one of the oldest continuously operating monasteries in the world. And for over 1,300 years, the monks there have been making something they call Vinum Fortis, the strong honey wine. But this wasn't for communion. This wasn't for celebration. This was for the travelers. See, the abbey sits along what was once one of the most dangerous mountain passes in Europe, the Great St. Bernard Pass. In winter, it was a death trap, avalanches, crevasses, and cold that could kill in hours. The hospice of the Great St. Bernard, where those famous rescue dogs came from, was established specifically because so many travelers were dying. And when someone came to the hospice half frozen, barely alive, the monks had a last resort, the Vinum Fortis. For centuries, this formula was a closely guarded secret. Only the abbey's infirmarian and his apprentice knew the complete recipe. When one died, the knowledge passed to the next. But in 2012, something changed. The last monk who knew the traditional formula, Brother Antoine Fournier, was dying. He was 89 years old, and he made a decision. The knowledge was too valuable to die with him. He contacted Dr. Claudia Müller, an ethnobotanist at the University of Zurich, and he told her everything. What she learned shocked the scientific community. The Benedictine Vinum Fortis formula. This formula was more sophisticated than anything the Vikings or Mongols had created. It required specific timing, temperature control, and ingredients that had to be harvested at precise times of year. Base ingredients: Alpine honey, specifically from bees feeding on edelweiss and Alpine rose, collected only in late summer. Spring water from a specific Alpine source. The mineral content mattered. A starter culture maintained by the monastery for centuries. The critical additions: gentian root, harvested in autumn, dried for exactly 3 months. Alpine wormwood, Artemisia glacialis, only grows above 9,000 feet. Angela root and seeds. Carline thistle, Carlina acalis. Lemon balm, Melissa officinalis. And here's the secret ingredient: Rhodiola Rosea, golden root. Now, most of these herbs were known in medieval medicine, but rhodiola? That was unusual. Rhodiola doesn't grow in the Swiss Alps. It grows in Siberia, Scandinavia, and the high mountains of Central Asia. So how did 6th century Swiss monks know about it? The answer? They learned it from Byzantine physicians, who had learned it from Persian traders, who had learned it from Central Asian nomads.
This formula represents over 2,000 years of accumulated knowledge from multiple cultures, all crystallized into one recipe. But here's what makes it really special: the science behind the monastery formula. When Dr. Müller analyzed the Vinum Fortis, she found something remarkable. Each ingredient had been chosen not just for its individual properties, but for how it interacted with the others. Gentian root is intensely bitter. It triggers something called the bitter reflex, a physiological response that increases digestive secretions and blood flow to the core organs. In hypothermia, this helps maintain organ function. Alpine wormwood contains absinthin, a compound that stimulates the central nervous system. But unlike caffeine, it doesn't cause jitters or anxiety. It keeps you alert without the crash. Angela is a vasodilator, but here's the genius part. When combined with the other herbs in this formula, particularly the gentian, it causes selective vasodilation. Blood flow increases to core organs and the brain, but not to the extremities where you'd lose heat. Carline thistle has powerful antimicrobial properties. In a winter survival situation, pneumonia and other infections are often the actual cause of death. This prevented that. Lemon balm contains rosmarinic acid, which has been shown in modern studies to reduce stress-induced immune suppression. When you're freezing and terrified, your immune system crashes. Lemon balm prevents this. And then there's the rhodiola. Rhodiola, the miracle adaptogen. This is the ingredient that modern science is most excited about. Rhodiola Rosea is what's called an adaptogen, a substance that helps your body adapt to stress. And cold is one of the most profound stressors there is. In 2009, researchers at the University of California found that it increases time to exhaustion in extreme conditions by an average of 24%, reduces the metabolic cost of maintaining body temperature, protects cellular function in low oxygen environments, and reduces the cognitive impairment that comes with hypothermia. But here's the really wild part. A 2018 study published in Frontiers in Pharmacology found that rhodiola actually increases your body's production of heat shock proteins, molecules that protect your cells from temperature stress. The monks didn't know about heat shock proteins. They didn't understand cellular biology, but they knew that travelers who drank this formula survived when others didn't. How the monks made it. The process took weeks and required precise timing. In late summer, they'd harvest the Alpine honey. This was crucial. The honey had to come from bees that had fed on Edelweiss and Alpine rose. The herbs were harvested throughout the year, each at its optimal time. Then in early October, they'd begin the fermentation. The honey would be dissolved in the Alpine spring water, warmed to exactly blood temperature, no hotter. The herbs would be added in a specific order, each at different times during the fermentation. The mixture would ferment for exactly 21 days. Not 20, not 22, 21. Dr. Müller figured it out. At 21 days, the fermentation reached a point where the alcohol content peaked at around 8 to 9% ABV, high enough to extract the medicinal compounds from the herbs, but not so high that it would cause dangerous vasodilation. At 21 days, the pH reached exactly 3.8, the optimal level for preserving the active compounds while preventing the growth of harmful bacteria. The monks had discovered through trial and error what modern chemistry can barely explain. The evidence. For over 1,000 years, the Hospice of the Great St. Bernard kept records of travelers they treated. In the harsh winter of 1695 to 96, of those who were given only conventional treatment, the mortality rate was about 25%. Of those who were given the Vinum Fortis in addition to conventional treatment, the mortality rate was less than 5%. 5 times better survival. The formula worked. So here's where we are today. In 2015, Dr. Müller published her findings about the monastery formula. It should have been a bombshell, but it was largely ignored. Modern medicine doesn't like complexity. We like single compounds. These formulas are messy. They contain dozens of active compounds that interact in ways we're still trying to understand. But some researchers kept digging. In 2019, the U.S. Army's Research Institute of Environmental Medicine found that a combination of honey, rhodiola, and specific bitter herbs significantly outperformed any single isolated compound. They'd accidentally recreated part of the monastery formula. The science is slowly catching up to what our ancestors knew, but we're not there yet, and this knowledge is being lost. Brother Antoine died in 2014. The Abbey of St. Maurice no longer makes the traditional Vinum Fortis. It's too time-consuming. Most, but not all, emergencies. So let's go back to where we started. Valley Forge, December 1777. What was that formula the medical tents were brewing? Dr. Albigence Waldo's journal, which is preserved in the Library of Congress, describes it. He talks about a preparation of honey and herbs after the manner used by the Germans. The formula they were using? It was almost certainly a variation of the monastery formula. Simplified, adapted to what ingredients they could find in Pennsylvania, but the core principles were the same. Waldo wrote, "I have observed that men who take this preparation regularly show greater resistance to the cold and recover from exposure more readily than those who do not." He just knew it worked. We know that Washington's army survived that winter. They survived. And when spring came, they emerged as a more disciplined, more unified fighting force. Could they have done it without those ancient formulas? Maybe. But I wouldn't bet on it. Now I know what you're thinking. Can I make these? The answer is yes, but with some important caveats. Safety first. These formulas contain alcohol and powerful herbs. They're not for everyone. Don't use if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Don't use if you have liver problems. Don't use if you're taking blood thinners. Don't give to children. And obviously don't rely on these as your primary survival strategy. These formulas are supplements to proper winter survival techniques. But here's the reality. If you're serious about winter preparedness, these formulas are worth learning, not as replacements for modern medicine, but as complements to it. The Viking's Bjor is the easiest to make and the most forgiving. The ingredients are relatively common, and the process is straightforward.
I've put together detailed instructions for all three formulas, including modern adaptations, where to source ingredients, fermentation tips, and safety guidelines in a free guide. You can find the link in the description below. Our ancestors spent thousands of years figuring out what kept people alive in the harshest conditions. Modern science is amazing, but we shouldn't abandon the wisdom that came before. Because sometimes, in remote places, in emergency situations, when modern supply chains fail, the old ways are still the best ways. These three formulas represent something bigger than just winter survival. They represent a different way of thinking about medicine, not as a war against nature, but as a partnership with it. The skills that kept people alive for thousands of years, they might matter again sooner than we think. So learn these formulas, practice making them, understand the principles behind them. Not because you'll definitely need them, but because knowledge is the one survival tool that never runs out. If you found this valuable, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to preserving practical knowledge that's being lost. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever used traditional remedies in survival situations? What worked? What didn't? And share this video with someone who needs to see it. Someone who believes, like I do, that the old ways still have something to teach us.